Hello, everybody. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have with us today Samantha Carroll, who's going to be talking with us about nurturing a happy career, the power of personal branding, something that I think as HR professionals, we don't always have as much time as I think it's a luxury for all of us to really focus on ourselves and how we can elevate ourselves and really put all that we give into everyone else, into ourselves, so that our brand can really show who we are. Samantha is the CEO of Once Upon a Brand, which is a public relations society of America award-winning communications consultancy. Once Upon a Brand drives high-profile communications projects, ideates strategies, and defines messaging for mature and growth stage clients, specializing in healthcare, social advocacy, education, and technology sectors. She's also the co-founder of a women's board and leadership readiness program called Board of Advise Hers, hosted by Light Her Way. Her mission is to connect ambitious leaders to current board members, expanding access to board seat acquisition, and improving knowledge about board work. Samantha, we're so excited to have you with us today. Let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, PJ. Well, I've been so excited to come here today and speak to all of you. Branding is one of my most favorite things to talk about, and we're going to get into it with some tactical advice and thoughts to think about when you're doing your own personal branding. Which, is so interesting because personal branding is kind of having a bit of a moment right now. We hear a lot about it, but it's really an age-old concept and it deserves to be revisited frequently, especially along the leadership spectrum, and really re-examine periodically to make sure that we're applying it across the online and offline outlets that are available to us. So I want to start off with two of my favorite quotes. And you all can see the screen okay? Yeah, great. So the first one is just that if you're not branding yourself, you can be sure others are going to do it for you. You may have seen this with your own career or others' careers, those that you support. And so we want to take back a bit of that control and own the brand that we are putting out there. The second quote here is really from one of my favorite marketing icons who I was lucky enough even to be on a Zoom with the other day, who's Seth Godin. And he says, people do not buy goods and services. They buy relations, stories, and magic. And that's really what we're going to talk about today is the ability to engage, the ability to connect, and where that all comes from. What is that source of connection for people? So here are a couple of assumptions that I made coming into this conversation today. PJ was kind enough to send me responses from the form that everyone filled out. And I think we have alignment there. So we're going to talk about some of these. So personal branding really answers a lot of these, and that's why I kind of step into a conversation with these beliefs. So one is, do people, whether that's employees, partners, members, really understand what I do and the value that I have in the workplace? How do I establish myself as a thought leader or as a leader? How can I influence how employees rely on my support? What's the purpose even of executive branding? Do I need it? I keep hearing about it. How do I apply it? What's it going to do for me? And then is there a right time? So if I'm younger, in my career, or if I, am sort of at the tail end of my career, where does personal branding come into play? So I sent PJ two little polls, and we can start with the first one. Oops, I go to that one. I'm going to put it up on the screen too. And the first is just to see what your professional goals are for the coming year.
All right, I'll give it another few seconds. Can we go ahead and share the results?
Yeah. So we see a lot of people using personal branding to change the narrative or control the narrative of how others want to see us, right? So increasing opportunities to be a speaker or a thought leader, looking for other leadership roles, shifting careers, changing careers, transitioning within a company, having a greater impact. So those are all great, and we're going to touch on those. And we can go to the second poll. So we're going to do a quick poll about frustration. So think about what makes you the most frustrated because we want to tap into those pain points.
Okay, just a few more seconds. Okay, and sharing the results.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it looks like by far not effectively developing my leadership skills. And so it is often at the root of leadership issues is communication. And that's why I'm so passionate about this topic. So let's move on a bit. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I've used brand storytelling throughout my career because I think it'll help you understand my background and sort of my passion for this. So when I was 19, way back when, I was an intern for NBC. I worked on the show Dateline, which was an evening news program. And the show that I was assigned to was the aftermath of the shooting at Columbine High School, which was essentially the really first school shooting that made news. It was a huge story. And this was interviewing kids that were affected, survivors, people in that community. And how do we tell that story? I then moved thinking I was going to stay in the media industry to Comedy Central, and it was doing product. I worked for the executive producer, and we did specials and stand-up and events programming. And really, it was about building the brand story of the network. And so we were executing strategies for the production of all of these shows. We were aligning comedians and events to the interest of the network, and working with creatives really on their personal brand story, helping them sort of come up through the ranks, which was great as I see a lot of them now on TV with these massive careers. And it's cool to see and think about when they were just starting out. When I was in business school, I wanted to stay within the communications world. And I was ecstatic that it was called Business Week at that point. Now it's Bloomberg Business Week. Was doing a writing competition where people could chronicle their time spent in business school and what did that mean. As you know, the minority as a woman in business school, also as one of the youngest, I think I was second or third youngest in my class. I thought this is amazing. I'm going to go out for it. And so I was chosen as the first representative for Georgetown and wrote for Business Week throughout my 2 years. And that was really about developing the story of what it's like to be in business school for others. But it was helping me develop my personal story as someone who could write for a credible news source and be recognized for that. When I came out of Georgetown with my MBA, I then went to work for Booz Allen Hamilton. We'll talk about like a 180 from Comedy Central and Dateline NBC. I was consulting in the federal sector, doing communications and change management. And here I was working with different huge, large scale federal agencies developing ways for internal agencies to better communicate with themselves. And a lot of the time, it was about gathering and telling stories and having conversations that would then influence change or influence some kind of big organizational change. Maybe it was, different policies or processes. When I left Booz Allen, I became editor at large for an award-winning parenting magazine. And we did all kinds of testimonials and firsthand experiences, interviews, informal case studies, and stories that really brought resources, tools, and insights to a virtual parenting library. And really, why I built Once Upon a Brand was because I'm a storyteller for brands. That's what I do. And as a storyteller, I'm really helping them position the blocks that set them up to create a sustainable, resilient structure. So for C-suite and senior executive, storytelling translates very easily to career development because we identify kind of the right pieces to put in the right place that convey a narrative that is two things: easily understood and well accepted. And so we're going to understand a little bit more about how we craft that story for you and for what's important in your world. Here's just a couple of the organizations that we've advised and I've advised, just for a little background. And I want to just get into the meat of it right now. So you're looking at three pictures here. I'm pretty sure you know who the first one is. We all know that's Lady Gaga. Thumbs up. The second, Oprah Winfrey. I don't know if you know who the third one is. And so I want you to take a second and put in the chat. And I can't see the chat for some reason. I'm not sure why, but oh, maybe I can. I can see the chat. Great. I love that you say my childhood favorite, Cheryl. Me too. Okay, good. All right. So you're correct, Megan. It is Judy Blume. Now, you may not recognize Judy Blume from her picture, but I'm pretty sure we've all heard of Judy Blume. And the reason that we've heard of her is because A, she's out there. We all grew up, most of us grew up reading her books, but she's created a huge personal brand that, doesn't necessarily, when we think of personal branding, we're not saying you have to be out there and you have to become famous. That's not what it's about. It's in one word, it's reputation. So Judy Blume has created a really strong understanding of the impact that she's had and the values represented by this individual. So if we think of what her personal brand is, we might think of things like authenticity, of being a champion of adolescent development, being a steward of self-acceptance, being an advocate of stories, of storytelling, of sharing information and building understanding between generations. And so that is the brand that she stands for. And when she chooses to align herself with different organizations or strategic partners, that is what is moving her forward and developing and nurturing that brand. So let's kind of dissect a little bit about what these successful brands have in common, because we want to apply this to our own development of our personal brands. So the very first is that they create a personal connection. They offer social proof, right? So what do I mean by social proof? Social proof is things like, who am I aligning myself with? Myself, writing for Business Week, that is a moment of social proof. I am telling people that I have done this before, I've been successful with it, and here's the proof. I'm building trust. I want to align myself and they want to align themselves with clear values. Illustrating consistency. So this is, a huge breakdown in communication is when we are inconsistent with the messages, with the audiences. It creates a lot of disconnect. And so when we apply this to things like employee engagement, right? Or burnout, we think about what are ways we can develop trust, consistency, right? With personal branding, we want to stay relevant and we want to use our own voice. So that's where it comes back to sort of that authenticity, right? So we're going to get into a couple of exercises because I want you to be able to walk away with some forward progress on this and something to think about when you leave today. But I do want to give you a little bit of background first on why brand storytelling is so important. Because when we think of personal branding, what we're really doing is developing the story of us. It's the story of you, and how do you want to build that story? So there's a great quote here that I have that says, to survive, businesses need to connect with audiences, pull at their heartstrings. Brand storytelling, oops, sorry, 1 second, is no longer a nice to have, it's a need to have, and what will ultimately maximize your business's visibility, profit, and impact. And so there's a great article, which I've sourced on the bottom of this slide, and you can kind of read more into it when you get these at the end of when PJ sends them out. And there's this idea of taking 20% versus 20%. So if I had these two numbers, and let's say I told you that there was a 20% chance of getting snow again in New England this weekend. You might think to yourself, well, 20%. I mean, yeah, I guess there's a little bit of a chance. I don't know that I'm going to really change my plans. If it snows, and maybe I'll throw a hat in the car. If I told you that there was a 20% chance of someone very close to you developing a terminal disease this year, the way that you feel about that information is likely very, very different. I'm using the same number, but the context I'm giving you around those numbers completely changes the way that you feel about them. So we have to think about the context and the meaning to our own lives of information and of data. And so it's really about the neuroscience, going back to kind of sharing stories, right? When we give stories a context, what we're really doing is enabling a pathway for our audience to connect to that story. And neuroscience actually tells us that when we hear a story that resonates with our own experiences, our own challenges, our brains actually release oxytocin, which is the love hormone. Our brains actually light up when we hear stories. And so what that does is it offers an opportunity to build empathy, trust, and lay the groundwork for a meaningful relationship. And that's where we get to connection. So executive brand storytelling. Let's take all this information about storytelling and now apply it to your brand. So an executive brand is built really with an intentional approach to communicating the values that drive your professional work. Executive brand storytelling is when we take all of those experiences that you've had and all of the values that you have, and we smush them together and come up with great stories that we can help others understand our impact. So you may have done exercises in the past or heard people talk about knowing your why. Simon Sinek, if anyone follows him, talks a lot about knowing your why, starting with why. And for those that aren't familiar, your why is really the driving force behind your work and what makes you kind of get up in the morning, what makes you excited. And so it's a values-driven solution. I think of why our why matters for two big reasons. And we think about this also as it relates to employees and those that you all support, right? So we think about A, we can't plan out the steps to get to a happier career. We can't figure out that how unless we're starting with why. Why am I doing this? I can't think of tactical steps, tactical strategies until I start with this. What do I believe in? What do I care about? What's going to, make me happier in this situation? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is another reason why this is such a powerful exercise is because when you can confidently recite talking points from your head that authentically represent you, it conveys confidence, right? And so when those questions come up like in an interview or in other settings of tell me about yourself and you have that answer right away, you're projecting confidence. You're projecting a personal brand that is building your reputation that you are then that expert. So it takes preparation to be able to be in that place. So for those who are looking for different leadership positions, for those who are looking to transition a career or make an internal change, that's why this is so powerful. Um, and the third kind of, reason is that when you think about your employees too, it really helps in terms of letting others know of your interests so that when those opportunities pop up, that person understands, hey, that's really important to her. She might be, or he might be great for this project or great for this program, and I'm going to then pull them in. So let's talk a little bit about, and we're going to work on some why statements. Here are some examples so you can see how we're pulling in values to these statements. So things like, I enable higher rates of employee satisfaction by fostering deeper connections within the company. There's a value there of connection. I foster trust by utilizing opportunities that make people feel valued. I help organizations stay competitive. That's a value, being competitive, by skillfully negotiating contract terms. So you can tell someone that your job is about going through contracts and comparing them. You can also tell someone that you support organizations and enable them to be more competitive by skillfully negotiating contract terms. And so there's a nuance there that conveys a really different meaning. So here's where we're going to get a little bit more interactive. I want you all to look at this values list. Not comprehensive in any world, but it's a good start. And I want you to consider what matters to you, not necessarily in it may have a crossover with your personal life, but I want you to think in regards to your professional environment and your work life. And I want you just to jot down what you would consider to be your top 5. And I'll just give you like a minute or so to do that. Again, these are another way to think about this is what is absolutely non-negotiable for you? We have another maybe 20 seconds, let's say. It's hard to narrow it down to 5. I've done this with, groups of different leaders, and we start out with this huge list and we cull it down and it gets harder, and harder. So I'm letting you pick 5, and we're going to keep those in the back of our head, okay? Okay, I am going to move forward. Here's where we're going to dig a little bit deeper into your motivators. And all of this, again, just to reiterate, is because this is going to fuel the messaging and the actions you take to build your personal brand. So, the very first thing that we want to think about, and you can jot it down on a piece of paper or something, you can put it in the chat if you want to share with others, is just to think about times when you are motivated and what motivates you. So look at those values. So, for example, if I value communication, I may say, I am motivated when I'm in a room of creative people and we're able to share ideas and brainstorm strategies. The next one to think about is when I witness others blank, it makes me feel this way. When we're coming up with a why statement, we want to think about making it simple, making it easy to remember for you so that when you explain it to someone else or someone else says to you, what drives you in your work? Why do you do this job? Why do you want this new job? You can fall back on this and you can think about it really, really easily. And we want to focus on the affirmative. So, why do you do the work that you do? You went into this career for a reason. And so it's important to take a minute and think about what that core reason is. Is it to make others' experience easier? Is it to provide answers? Is it to be that support system for others? And then here's where it gets a little bit harder. So I'm going to do a little bit of an example and kind of model this so that when you take this home later or think about it today, you can come up with your why as well. So I might start off for me and I might say, um, I'm motivated because when organizations communicate better, they're able to expand their work and create deeper understanding. And then I would ask myself a second why. Why? Because stakeholders clearly understand how to engage with the organization. Why? Because their messages are clear and directive, leading people to an action. Why? Why are people led to an action? Because they're engaged and they're connected. And then the last why I might ask is because they want to work with you. So I might come up with a statement that says, I enable organizations and leaders to expand their influence by creating deeper connections with their stakeholders. So if anyone would like to share theirs in the chat, please feel free. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. I have two things here that are important as part of the process when you're thinking about doing sort of a personal brand audit, right? It's thinking about going back to these values, right? And connecting it to three words that describe you. Maybe it's three words that come to your own head that describe you. Maybe you ask friends or colleagues or partners how they might describe you today, in this moment today. Maybe there are themes that have come up in your leadership or performance assessments, right? And so as you think about this information and as you kind of digest it, and it's a lot, you can think about this is me in a snapshot of today. So if I had to explain myself to others, this is where I am today. If we then think about these same prompts for how you want your brand to be tomorrow, it's a really important exercise to think about, do those words hold? Am I seen by those that I work with in this way, or do I want to be seen in this way, but I'm not really there yet? And what do you want the themes of your assessments to be tomorrow? So if something that's come up is you're a great organizer, um, and you really love, organizing events, and you want to be seen as someone who can be relied on for that, that may be something that's here today and tomorrow. But if you want to move into other leadership roles, something that describes your brand today may not be, something that maybe it needs to evolve to get to where you want it to be tomorrow. So here are some things that you can sort of think about as you're developing your personal brand, because we need to start connecting the dots between how you are seen today and the reputation you have and how you want to be seen tomorrow. So here's where we get into a little bit of the tactical of what makes a great story. And there's different sort of acronyms out there. One that I have used for many, many, many years is the PAR formula. There's also something out there called the STAR formula, but they all sort of relate to the same idea. And that is when we think about um, how to build our story and how to connect it, right, to the values, or how do I think about what my brand is tomorrow and move into that. What I want to do is pull together stories from my, right, remember executive brand storytelling, we connect our experiences and our values. So if I want to be seen a certain way tomorrow, let's say I want to be seen as a speaker. Okay. You don't do a lot of it right now, but you want people to really know you as this incredibly dynamic speaker. You're going to start to look for opportunities where you can do that, right? And so what you're going to want to do is connect those experiences for your audience to understand your value by thinking about a story that you can put together that conveys your impact. And so what we do is we start with a problem, right? We think about maybe a challenge that someone came to you and said, hey, um, I have this group of people. They really need to understand XYZ better. I know you've done it for a really long time. And so that could be an example of a problem that you're coming in to fix, right? Or address. Then we move into the action. So the action in this case, in this little example, would be you speaking to this group and helping them address these kinds of challenges. And then we think of the result or the outcome of that. So maybe we need to gather a little bit of feedback after that presentation. How did people feel about it? Did it hit home? Were they able to take action on it, or take those lessons and then support others with it? And so what were those sort of measurable? It can be qualitative, like, doesn't have to be a quantitative, oh, this increased by 10%. It doesn't need to be that kind of an outcome. But using this problem action result framework helps us shape a story. This was happening, and I came in and I did this action. I took this action, and this was the result. You only need about 2 or 3 of these stories around something that you're trying to build reputation wise to say over and over and over again. And as we know, marketing is all about, repetition, right? And so when you do that, you're starting to create the understanding in others of the impact that you've had. So PJ did mention LinkedIn, and we're going to talk a little bit about now that we are thinking about our values, we're thinking about the stories we can put together. We're trying to bridge today to tomorrow, and how do we build our personal story with our actual stories and content that we're going to put out there. Here are a couple, and this is Simon Sinek, if you're not familiar with him. And so we're going to think about looking at LinkedIn. Where do we start to kind of infuse these moments of branding? Um, so I have these arrows, right, that are pointing. So he's got, this great headshot. It's high quality image. He cares about how you see him. It's a newer professional, clear picture. Keywords. He's using keywords that others might search for. So maybe founder or best-selling author. He's got his keywords in here. He's got, a compelling headline, right? So instead of saying HR manager, you can certainly say HR manager at such and such company. You can also say people connector, or transformative people connector, something that's going to like sink into someone's brain, and think about how you are describing the impact you have on others, right? The fact that and you certainly don't need to be on a premium account on LinkedIn, but for him, it's important, because he also has this huge audience, and he has a certain status that feeds into the whole status thing for Simon Sinek. He has a great banner. Here's another place, this big orange rectangle behind his head that says ideas only come to life when we share them. He is all about stories and about talking and connection and understanding. And so this is like his tagline. So maybe there's a tagline that you can bring into your personal branding, or something that really resonates with you that you want others to think about. And then he's also got you can actually brand your LinkedIn URL. So if you want to, instead of having numbers and, kind of random symbols in your URL, and it's just a quick way to tell other people, hey, go to linkedin.com/, in/Simon Sinek. I don't know what his is, but that's another way that you can actually brand yourself. You cannot use your name. You could actually even just say, like, Rockstar HR manager. So I hope PJ doesn't mind I'm pulling. I pulled yours in because it was such a great example of what I wanted to show. This is something from PJ and something from Light Her Way Board of Advisors, which PJ referenced, and I'll tell you about sort of at the end. But other ways to infuse your personal brand are things like testimonials. So let's say we're thinking about our brand today, we're thinking about our brand tomorrow. We want to be seen as a leader. I'm going to go and talk with people who have seen me lead in one way or the other. Maybe it's even in a small group. Maybe it's as the leader of a huge organization. And those are the testimonials that I'm going to pull in really thoughtfully, because there might be testimonials that I can put in that are on a range of different ways that I've affected organizations. But if I want to be seen a certain way, I need to curate a list that is going to speak only to those values and only to the way that I want people to think about me. And I'm going to try to get those people to follow problem, action, result, and bring that story in. So I now not only am using executive branding, I'm using storytelling, and I've just created a brand champion that others can then look and say, oh, hey, so and so, I know so and so. Wow, they did a testimonial for, X, Y, and Z. That's really interesting. So that's how I'm starting to sort of cultivate that reputation. Now, when PJ does something on here, hashtag ACC family or hashtag ACCAM24, those are what we actually call branded hashtags. So I might brand a hashtag for my women's leadership community by saying hashtag board of advisors. I'm going to keep using these hashtags over and over and over again, and they're going to get me greater and greater visibility. The other thing I loved that PJ did in this is the actual message says, what an amazing staff. I feel truly honored to work with you. Whether you're on site or in the office, you help to make a difference. Thank you for all that you do to make our meetings such a valuable resource for our members. What shouts out at you? Gratitude, right? She's grateful for this community. She's sharing that connection. And that makes people engaged. People want to feel valued. And that's exactly what PJ did in this. And so that's something that as leaders, we need to make sure we're fostering. We think about employee engagement. We think about all of these different ways we want people to open our email and be engaged and come to our events. We need to pull them into that process by communicating effectively. And that's why it's so important in leadership today, especially. And it's especially hard when we think of kind of the geopolitical climate too, of divisiveness, how we foster those moments of engagement when people's values can be so different. And so I won't get off on a tangent. I'll come back. But the social media for Light Her Ways Board of Advisors, I wanted to just show you too. So here's a way that we are creating a reputation for women leaders. We are using things from other women leaders. This is just an example. I don't know how many people are familiar with Shelley Zalis. She's amazing, and she's the leader of this organization called the Female Quotient. And so by mentioning her in our post, I'm telling people we're aware of her, we support what she's doing, and I'm also sending a signal because she's going to see our post. I'm actually increasing visibility for her, right? And for those who are searching for her, because then I want to be included in that group, right? And she had something that she was speaking at this conference, CES 2025. It was very timely. It was on this day, and I'm encouraging people to go and see what she is doing. So it's another sort of subtle, almost, indirect, direct way of attaching ourselves to the values that are within her brand also. So now we think sort of tactically, coming back to how do we align all of this with better opportunities, a happier career. Maybe it's within your company. Maybe you don't want to change your company. You want to stay within your company, or maybe you do want to change your company. When you think about using these stories, you might be thinking, well, where do I use these? Is it just in an interview, telling someone, or at a conference, or at a meeting? Yes. And you can also use it in resumes. So one of the big things, so I do some resume development work when I work with different executives. And one of the big things is to transition a resume from just a list of things you do in your day, a task list, right? To the value that you have had on that organization. And we think about that in cover letters too. So I call them kind of story snippets, right? And so we think about how do we infuse in bullet points, in cover letters, in resumes, In an email, when you're doing email outreach to someone, sending, two quick bullet points about something, it can be, oh, you can fit a problem, action, and result in probably two sentences. We're not talking about a page long that you need to put together. So we think about corporate outreach and relationship building. And again, when you repeat those things over and over again, that's how you are fortifying that personal brand for yourself. Um, the last one is we think also about thought leadership efforts. And so if we want to think about our brand today and transitioning to our brand tomorrow, if you want to be known for something, if you want to start speaking about a certain topic, right? We can use these story snippets when we are connecting. So we have tons of stories, right, that are based on our experiences and tied to our values. But when I'm thinking about going for a certain target, a certain conference, or a certain, meeting or event that I am pitching myself for, or I want to write for a certain thing, I need to think in a really targeted way and build my stories and pull my information specific to that audience. Because if it's not specific, it's not going to connect well. And the person on the other side isn't going to understand the value of what I am trying to convey, right? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and tell you a little bit about PJ was generous to let me share a little bit about Board of Advisors. But I'd love for you, just to wrap up personal branding, to take some of those exercises, and I'm so happy she's going to share these slides, and really think about what the stories are you want to tell, what are the values that drive you, and think about if something doesn't exist in your current culture, in your current organization that really pulls at and connects to those values, then maybe instead of it being, a bummer situation, maybe it's an actual opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to then create a certain group, create a certain opportunity. Maybe there are others that feel like you, and so you have to sort of galvanize that effort. Because that, at the end of the day, if we don't feel valued and we don't feel like there's an alignment to our values, we aren't going to be happy in the position that we're in. That brings me to Board of Advisors. So for those of you that are thinking about leadership opportunities or joining a board of directors, I co-founded this group, which the the real motivation for this was that as I was looking for greater leadership opportunities, and a friend of mine from college a million years ago was also in that space, and she and I both have done a lot with women's leadership. She's an executive coach. I do communications and executive communications, and we put our heads together and said, when women are looking for board seats specifically and leadership roles, it is very, very hard to understand the process, to understand how others have done it. And we had conversation after conversation with very, very high up women leaders about, how did you get onto this board? How did you do this? And they would say, I don't really know. It just fell into my lap, or it just happened. And we wanted to pull back and deconstruct those layers to say, no, it didn't just happen. You did some things very strategically so that somebody else connects to personal branding, right? Someone else saw you and thought about you and thought you'd be great in this opportunity. So what we've done is really curated leaders from nonprofit, private, and public boards into this space, and we go through different 8 modules. Some of it is personal branding, and some of it is building that connection, trying to foster the relationships and the lessons learned, and actually learn tactically what you need to be successful when you do get to that position. It's something that can be brought to companies as if there are people within companies who would like a program like this or as part of different packages, we can certainly work with different organizations in that way too. So if there are teams interested, I'm happy to talk more about that offline. And I would love to connect with anyone who would like to send me a LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions, that come up for you after this. Um, and just a huge thank you to PJ for having me. I hope that this information was helpful and gave you a little bit of clarity as to really move into that happier space for you. And then also to take all of this and really apply it to those that you support so that they can begin to really move into a happier space also. So thank you.
Samantha, thank you
And
so
if we have
much.
time, I'm more than happy to answer questions in the chat too.
I was just about to say, if anyone has any questions, certainly feel free to put them in the chat or come off of mute. I personally had a question in looking at all of this, and thank you so much. They're just amazing tips and things that you don't think about. And it's really hard when someone says to you, well, why are you good at what you do? Or why do you do what you do? To actually
Yeah.
stop and think about that. Uh, is AI a tool that we can use to help us sometimes, even if to just get us started with maybe putting those five adjectives in and having it help us kind of develop what that statement might look like? So instead of simply saying, yeah, I negotiate contracts, it might be able to help us
Mhm.
come up with a different way to say it, I should say.
Yes, absolutely. AI is really helpful. And I'm a writer monkey. And so the process of writing for me is really a process I love. But I use it for ideas. And so I absolutely think that AI is a great place. And if you can't think of stories, if you're having a hard time thinking about, well, what are some outcomes that I had? AI is not going to be able to jump into your head and know what those outcomes were in real life, but you can put prompts in that say, what are some of the most common outcomes, right? To that occur when people take these actions. Get some ideas, get kind of those juices flowing and think about, oh yeah, oh, that was an outcome. It makes you think about things and then you can sort of apply it as you're thinking through. Um, Brainstorming other values, brainstorming what are the most common values someone has when they're in X, Y, and Z role. What are the main ways, if you want to learn more about board service, what are the main ways a board member impacts an organization, right? You need to start using those words, that lexicon, that language when you're speaking to that audience, right? It helps to kind of reinforce the fact that you know what you're talking about and you can speak this literally the same language. So AI is a great way to do that. Absolutely.
Any other questions anyone might have? Okay, we will give you back a few minutes on your Friday. Thank you again so much for joining us. Samantha, as you saw in the chat, everybody really appreciated all of this great
So
information.
glad.
Thank you very much for all of it, the amazing suggestions, ideas, the resources, the tips on LinkedIn, absolutely fantastic. We really appreciate all of you joining us. I did share the SHRM code in the chat. If for some reason you don't see it in there, please certainly feel free to reach out to me. I'll be happy to reshare it with you. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us, and hope that everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Thanks so much, everybody.
Patricia, would you
Yes,
be able to email the I don't need a SHRM credit by any means, but I do want to see the content and I hate that I'm
absolutely.
late. I'm trying to rebrand myself and rebuild myself and I thought this would be perfect and then I'm an hour late.
Not a problem. Yes, I will be sending out a summary to everybody that'll include a copy of the recording.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.